Hey everybody, welcome to Each Other News. We've got Tim Erlin. He's a security strategist and VP of product at Wallarm. And they just recently did a report and all kinds of threat stuff, and we're going to find out what was in there, what happened. Tim, first of all, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great. How are you?
Very, very good. Well, kicking this off, just give us the basic overview of what Wallarm does.
Sure. Wallarm is an API security company. Fundamentally, our mission in life is to detect and block API attacks, simple attacks, sophisticated attacks, old attacks, new attacks. It's all about detecting and blocking those attacks.
So let's double click a bit in API. I mean, obviously we know API is the way machines communicate to each other. And, if you actually did an analysis, you'd be surprised of how many API connections are happening every day. And those things take your data from one point to another point, and nobody even knows actually, what happens at the end of the day. And it's definitely an attack, a threat vector, right? What's your take on how APIs are a bit of a problem, if you will, in the cyber world?
Well, so first of all, we've seen really a huge growth, an explosion in the use of APIs because the way that organizations deliver services, deliver applications has fundamentally shifted to using APIs as the back end for just about everything. So now when you visit a web application or a web page, behind that is potentially hundreds, thousands of APIs that get called with every interaction on that page. So APIs are really that connective tissue, not just between machine to machine, but also now between the people and the services that they're using online. And of course, attackers attackers follow the money, if you will. So as that landscape of APIs has grown, as the API economy, as it's called, has grown, attackers have said, "Hey, those are the things I'm going to target now because that's where the money is." So that's where we see the increase in threats targeting APIs specifically.
So, just without going into more detail, but give me an example of how a hacker would grab an API and infiltrate the organization. What's a typical scenario?
Yeah, I think it's an ever-evolving landscape, right? Because as we learn to defend those APIs against certain types of attacks, the attackers want to innovate and try new things. But there are a few examples. A good example would be like an account takeover attack. So if you have an API that is used for logging in, for authenticating to a service, and an attacker can compromise that API, they can get access to that service as a legitimate user. Now, they might do that because of a functional flaw, a software flaw in that authentication endpoint, it would be called. They might also do that by just having a set of stolen, compromised credentials that they can use to log in. So those are different types of attacks against the same endpoint. Another example that's a good one is just simply scraping data. So I have an API. APIs are designed to present data in a nice consumable format for another machine. And if as an attacker, can use that API to just take a large amount of data through a series of requests or through one batched request, I can start scraping data from your application. Sometimes that data might be authorized, individually, but in aggregate, it's a problem. Or sometimes it's that I've found an API that gives me access to data that I'm not supposed to have.
So now we got a little bit of a flavor of how the API attackers work. You did your it's called, I believe, threat stats report.
That's right.
So first,
Correct.
why you do this and what's in it, and then let's discuss, the findings.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is the fourth year that we've done the annual
Okay.
API threat stats. We do a report every quarter, and then we roll it up for the annual report. And it really started as a means for us to build a better product, right? We need to understand what the threat landscape looks like. We need to look at the types of breaches that have occurred, the vulnerabilities that have been discovered, the attacks that we've seen on our platform, and then incorporate that data into the defenses that we build, as a vendor. But at the same time, we found that data is really interesting and useful to practitioners. So we started producing these reports. And so really it examines, what are the trends in terms of vulnerabilities and exploits in the market over the last year? What are the trends in terms of incidents that have occurred, breaches that have occurred? That's the kind of data and analysis that we include in there.
Let's just dig right in. what's the first thing you found? Well, we'll start with what's the first thing was maybe the most surprising that you found.
Yeah. I will say, to be fair, if we're doing our jobs, there aren't too many surprises in the report because we've seen every quarter the trends, sort of move in that direction. But I think there are a few things that are worth calling out. I would say there are a couple of key findings that we should discuss. So the first is there's been a really incredible ramp up in terms of vulnerabilities in AI systems, AI tools. Just call them AI vulnerabilities. The second is that the percentage of vulnerabilities that are out there in the world that are related to APIs has continued to grow and grown very quickly. So those are kind of the two key findings, and that ends up with informing sort of the main title of the report this time around, which is that AI security is really API security, that they're almost the same thing at this point.
So, I mean, it's kind of interesting, but this is probably not possible, but maybe it is. Like, can AI create APIs and and
Yeah,
allow?
maybe there's an inflection point where AI is just creating all its own APIs at some point. No, I mean we say that and we laugh, but obviously there are AI, code generation and code assistant tools that are absolutely enabling developers to develop and deliver new APIs much more quickly. I think it's to quote another report, Postman does an annual state of API report, not API security, but API adoption and usage. I think the figure from there was 63% of developers in their last report said they could deliver a new API within a week. And I expect that figure only to get faster given the adoption of AI tools to help them.
Well, I hope they're figuring out what the code is in those APIs because, the challenge, of course, is a lot of folks are just grabbing, code from the internet, and maybe that's also infected with stuff. I don't know what's in the code of an API, but is that something
Yeah.
that we should be also worried about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should always, as practitioners, we should be worried about whatever we're deploying in our environment and making sure that we have appropriate assurance that we're not introducing new risks, new vulnerabilities. The use of open source tools that you pull from someone else and the use of AI generated code, they both present risks because you haven't audited that code yourself to ensure that it's free from flaws and vulnerabilities. So I think there are real risks there, and we'll see those risks realized in the coming years for sure.
So give me what. So what else did you find? And that was one, I believe. Is there another thing that's
Yeah.
worth calling out?
Well, let's talk about some of the actual details in the report, if you will. So
Okay.
um, vulnerabilities, we generally track vulnerabilities as published vulnerabilities that are known. They're published with CVE IDs, Common Vulnerability and Exposure IDs. And in 2023, there were 39 AI vulnerabilities published. And then in 2024, that jumped to 439. So that's something like a 1,025% increase.
Wow.
And so we can just see from that the risk that AI is presenting, in the world is growing, almost exponentially at this point. Now, that by itself just says that AI is introducing risks. The corresponding metric that we pulled out is the percentage of exploits in CISA's known vulnerability exploit catalog that are API related. And that grew from 30% to 50%. So just to be clear, CISA tracks known exploited vulnerabilities. They publish this catalog. It's really useful. If you want to protect yourself from specific vulnerabilities, these are the ones you should worry about, right? And 50% of those now are API related. So when we combine these two things together, API vulnerabilities and AI vulnerabilities, we found that 98.9% of the AI vulnerabilities are also API related. So we see consistent growth in the API threats, but a really exponential, almost exponential growth in the AI API related threats. And that's how we kind of bring those two things together.
Why is that? So AI is obviously triggering automatically, APIs, right? To do things, pull information, send data, whatever. Is it because AI is just pushing a lot of more requests and pulling information
Yeah.
back, or
Well, simply put, you can't have AI without API, right?
Right.
APIs are what allow AI tools to operate, and you have to think about the different types of tools that are out there a little bit, right? So there are the large language models, the LLMs that we kind of know and hear a lot about, ChatGPT and Meta Llama, and Google Gemini, those kinds of things. The front ends of those interfaces that you use to chat with them, behind that APIs, absolutely. But then we start looking at how large enterprises are deploying AI into their products, into their businesses. All of those deployments are also driven by APIs. So if I, as an enterprise, want to use, ChatGPT for something in my company, I'm going to put in place, in a product or in a tool, I'm going to put in place a set of APIs that call out, kind of like a proxy, call out to ChatGPT to do that. And where we're headed now, I mean, I think so. If you watched the Super Bowl, there were a couple of commercials from Salesforce that were all about AI. And what they were really talking about there is AI agents or agentic AI, where it's not just information, it's not just asking ChatGPT to, write me a story or, write an article or whatever it is. Now these AI agents will actually be able to take actions, do things like change your reservation, which is entirely API driven, right? So this AI agent now has the hook via an API to a reservation system that might be another AI agent in that, and and can make
AI
these changes.
agents
So
talking to AI agents
yeah,
talking to AI agents. That'd be something.
right. All over APIs. They're all connected by APIs.
So, Tim, how worried should we be as a business, right? Looking at API vulnerability on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say, let's start there. But then maybe you can give me a couple of examples of
Yeah,
how API, has actually breached or hackers have breached with
sure,
API.
sure. So how worried should we be? I mean, that's always a tough question because um, if you do a poll of cybersecurity professionals, this is one of my favorite polls surveys that vendors do. They go out and they ask cybersecurity professionals if they're worried about whatever problem they solve, and inevitably 98% of them say yes because we're in cybersecurity. Our job in part is to worry.
Gotta say yes.
So we should be worried, but we shouldn't be, we should be worried enough to prepare, to think about how to solve this problem. To, as you're looking, in your organization at deploying AI in some way, to at least ask the question of, well, how are we protecting this? What are the risks? Is this worry or is it just cybersecurity doing its job? Um, the adoption of AI is moving very quickly, which means that we also on the cybersecurity side need to move very quickly to keep up with it. So there are real concerns there, but they're not outsized concerns. They're not things that we don't know how to deal with. In many ways, the problems the problems are the same problems, just with new technology, and that's kind of how things tend to move.
So, any 1 or 2 examples of how the hackers have leveraged APIs to, hurt someone or something?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, we include in our threat stats report looking at the breaches from the previous year. So we're looking back in history now. There were a few that we called out as sort of the top five most interesting maybe API related breaches. One was with Dell, which compromised 49 million users. So there were 49 million users affected. And this was an interesting one because it involved multiple steps. It was actually an attacker who registered with a partner as a partner with Dell, and so there was no process to validate that they were a real partner, and then used those partner APIs to scrape, sensitive data from other partners through Dell using, if I remember correctly, using the Dell service tags. So as a partner, you had access to this information, and they were able to access information via a service tag that they weren't supposed to have. So that's one example of kind of a scraping incident that occurred. Another interesting example. Let's see. Uh, there was a Optus, which is a mobile provider in Australia, and they actually had a vulnerability in their web application, and they also had one in the API that supported that web application. And they fixed the one in the web application, but they didn't fix the one in the API. And so the attackers used that flawed API to compromise user data there. I think it was 9.5 million users were impacted by that. So those are just a couple of examples. There's certainly more that occur.
Sure. I mean, look. sometimes it's hard for channel partners to quantify this to the customers. I think we all kind of get it that there's a problem, right? And then the customer says, well, should we spend the money there or there? You know,
Mhm.
where will I get the most bang for my protection buck, if you will, right? So if an MSP had to explain this, right, to their customers, right, what would you suggest they use, or how would they explain this to make them understand that they need to do this? Is it a certain type of clients that is more vulnerable, more those cell
Yeah.
companies, or where is the how can they explain it better?
Yeah. So, first of all, API security isn't it's not an area that is particularly verticalized, meaning that there aren't specific verticals or industry segments that are especially a lot about APIs. It really depends on the organization and whether or not they have APIs that generate revenue for them. So the first question is, are you using APIs to generate revenue? And that really is the key discovery question, if you will, for is this organization going to care about API security? And then from there, the conversation is pretty straightforward. If you're using these APIs to generate revenue, shouldn't they be pretty high on the list of things you need to protect? If these APIs are the front door to the services you provide, um, then they really need to be a priority in terms of protection. And in some cases, organizations have, they've put in place security controls based on how they used to deliver services, and then they've moved towards a more API-centric method of delivering an application or a service, and they've left the security controls in place. They haven't evolved their security controls along with their application, their service, and that's another way to explore the problem with customers.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a great way to lead it off. I mean, are you making money from using APIs? And if the answer is yes, well, it sounds pretty obvious. You might want to, take a peek at that. I don't know if I asked the question, but what percentage of the internet traffic these days are APIs from the data points that you're getting?
Yeah. So the specific percentage varies depending on who you ask and who's looking at that traffic. And it ranges from anywhere from I've seen 70% up to 83, 85% depending on the source. And I mean it's important to think about that number for a second because it's correlated from multiple sources within some margin of error that the vast majority of internet traffic is APIs. And so if you're asking that same question of, why is this a priority? Why are APIs a priority to protect or to secure? Because they're the vast majority of the traffic on the internet is a perfectly valid answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's shocking to most people when they hear it because they don't get that, how can APIs be that much of a percentage of the internet traffic? And it just seems like it's going to get more and more, as you clearly pointed out,
Yeah.
as AI uses their own AI and create their own APIs and whatever else they do. It's just going
Well,
to get
yeah.
more.
I mean, you can ask the question, what else would it be? Because as I start thinking about that, okay, if it's not APIs, what else would it be? Well, email's on the decline. More and more people are using less and less email, more and more, instant messengers, Slack, Microsoft Teams, what have you. That's all API driven traffic. Many, if not all of almost all of the websites and web applications you visit are really APIs behind the scenes. So, you start asking that question and it looks like, well, there's not much left that isn't an API in some way.
Well, it's great to shine some light. Anything else that you found in the report that you want to, highlight?
I think the other thing that we do in this report annually is we update what we call our threat stats top 10. And so this is if folks are familiar with the OWASP API Security Top 10, the OWASP API Security Top 10 is a list of the top 10 vulnerabilities or flaws that folks should be concerned about. And it's updated every couple of years, not on a specific schedule. It's very useful, but it's not as sort of real time, not as dynamic as what we put in this report. So we included an update to that top 10. There are some things that didn't change that are notable. So last year, the number one type of attack that we see or threat that we see are injections. So SQL injection is always a popular example of that. It stayed number one. So injections are still at the top of the list. We saw the flaws around broken access control climb up from number 5 to number 2. So we saw an increase in broken access control type attacks and incidents as well. And then we added a new category for memory corruption and overflows. And that new category is tied to the sort of AI evolution, because as we see more and more APIs that have to be really high performance, that are sort of binary APIs, we're starting to see an increase in the types of vulnerabilities and attacks that impact memory corruption and overflows in APIs as well. So that dynamic top 10 is in that report as well, and it's a useful thing to look at if you're trying to see what kinds of specific flaws you should be worried about.
Well, that organization should maybe update their their list more than once every 2 years. I think
Well,
in
there are different methodologies involved there. OWASP has a particular methodology, and they produce some valuable data. We have some minor disagreements maybe with how they categorize things, but in general, I think the two can coexist pretty effectively.
I'm sure a very political statement there, Tim. Good stuff. Look, the one thing about we've seen obviously with cyber is that the landscape changes so much, and it's really about the folks on the other end, those hackers, that's trying to figure out, what's the next way to get in, to break in, and that's the thing that kind of like people worry about. And that, what's next? Like, do we even know what's next, right? So you've got some experience with what's going on with APIs and all that crazy stuff.
Sure.
Do you see anything else that maybe we should be concerned about, moving
Yeah.
forward?
Well, I can give you a prediction, and I can give you an absolute.
Okay.
So I can just about guarantee that in the next year we will absolutely see a continuation of all of those low-hanging fruit types of attacks. So if you have an API that is vulnerable to SQL injection, that's vulnerable to cross-site scripting or other cross-site issues, these tried and true attacks that attackers are very familiar with, they're going to keep using those as long as they're available. So we can talk about what's new and exciting, but the attackers are, they're interested in efficiency and economy. And if they can use an old exploit, they're going to use it. In terms of what's likely to come, um, I think we're going to see increased exploitation of AI in ways that we haven't necessarily thought about. So we've started to see the introduction of DeepSeek was interesting because it also drove a flood of sort of new exploit types that were specifically about, for example, jailbreaking that AI in various ways. So the more we see AI deployed, the more we're going to start seeing an increase in specific, AI specific exploits. And the more that organizations use AI, the more we're going to see attackers target it because that's where the money will be.
Are you pessimistic or optimistic about how, the AI, the cloud of, AI with cyber, how that's going to impact us, the businesses?
Oh, I'm optimistic for sure. I think AI has a huge number of benefits. I think there's great potential there. Just like with any technology, we have to make sure that we secure it, that we use it safely. You could look at it, along the same lines as the development of cloud and cloud computing. Great potential, but also comes along with a whole bunch of security concerns that we have to deal with, and we can deal with them. So I would definitely put myself in the optimistic camp.
There you go. Well, that's great news. So, Tim, I leave you with the last word. What's your last message to all the channel folks out there and the website for them to learn more?
Yeah. So obviously wallarm.com is the website to learn more. And I think there's huge from a channel perspective, there's huge opportunity in helping organizations solve these API security problems. They're very real problems. They're increasingly part of the primary attack vector in the threat landscape. But they're also solvable problems. And so I think it's a great opportunity to help a business move forward really effectively.
There you have it. Well, there you go, folks. There's a lot of moving parts to cybersecurity. API is one of those, and I'm pretty sure we're going to hear a lot more about it, especially as you mentioned that, Tim, as AI does their own APIs. Who knows what's going to happen? It's been a pleasure. Keep us posted. Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks, Julian.